Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 156. He'll bust your kneecaps. Ooh wop dee doo wop dee doo. Now Massa rubbed the sleep out of his eyes and squinted at his phone. He felt about 23% human at the moment, and he would be counting the days until he was finally promoted to chief detective so he could stop working split shifts. But he hardly knew what time it was anymore, much less what day it was. As the screen came into focus, he saw that it was 5:45 p.m. A perfectly acceptable time to be waking up on his day off. With a groan, he squinted at his phone again to read the date. June 29th. Only a week and 4 days until he was free of this nightmare schedule. Of course, he would then be taking on the full responsibilities as Mustafa's chief detective, but he had to imagine that it couldn't be worse than this. Aizawa, 2:46 p.m. I need a warrant for Aldera Junior High ASAP. God, what the hell was going on now? Tsukashi, 5:52 p.m. On what grounds and how ASAP is ASAP? He pressed send on the message, slung his legs over the side of the bed, and scrubbed the last remnants of sleep out of his eyes. For several months now, he'd been waking up with the same feeling you have when you wake up from a nap you didn't mean to take. And it wasn't getting any easier to manage. He had no clue how Aizawa did this shit. Incoming call from Aizawa. Speak of the devil. He cleared his throat and took a deep breath before answering. Hello. You sound like hell. Aizawa greeted none too pleasantly. Thanks, he replied just as kindly. How quickly can you get a warrant? It depends on what for, he answered halfway through a yawn. Quirk discrimination, as well as criminal negligence. I went over there and talked to them yesterday. Apparently, Midoriya's quirk was largely useless for the majority of his life, and the staff there was under the impression he was quirkless. Oh gosh. He could see it all coming down now. He knew it was only a matter of time before Aizawa found out about One for All. Well, if that didn't wake him up, he didn't know what would. I can only pin things on 3 of the staff there, 2 for negligence in regards to a grievous injury acquired on campus, and 1 for discrimination because he called Midoriya a word I won't be repeating and admitted to letting his students bully him. I played along, and I don't think they suspect they're under investigation. But in case they do, I don't want to give them time to sweep evidence under the rug. Aizawa plowed through his explanation, giving Naomasa yet another thing to be incredibly concerned about. Okay, emotional whiplash was one way to start the day. Jeez, this kid's life was a shit show. All right, that should be enough grounds for a warrant, unless there's someone in immediate peril. I can't guarantee it ASAP, but I'll see what I can do. Were there security cameras? What is it that you're after? Yes, there were. Minimal, but extant. I don't know who all I'll be able to implicate, but I won't know until I look. So there's not much I can do until then. Any more poking around would be suspicious. Testimony should be enough to get licenses revoked if we push hard enough. Have you talked to the kid about it? Yes, minimally. I doubt that he would be willing to give a testimony. That was tricky. If Midoriya didn't speak up for himself, then they would only be able to catch the most blatant offenders. Well, I guess this is a conversation for after you've reviewed any footage they've got, but if you can't get more evidence from that, then there's not a whole lot we can do. I don't want these people getting away with things just because they were smart enough to not do it in front of a camera. If Midoriya gives a testimony, then our case might have legs, but without that... He trailed off, letting Aizawa draw his own conclusions. He heard Aizawa sigh heavily on the other end of the line before he responded. Noted. Let me know when you get that warrant, he said, and then promptly hung up. The conversation left him wanting to crawl back under the covers, but instead he stood up, rummaged through his bag for his laptop, and started making coffee. He'd need to be in office to properly file the paperwork to get a warrant, but he could get the ball rolling from here. Finally! A warrant never felt so good. It took a full week, but he got one, and he was about to tear that school to the ground. He didn't bother buzzing in at the front gate. He just used his capture weapon to sling himself over it and marched straight up to the doors. The secretary gave him a confused look through the glass, but since she recognized him, she just buzzed him in rather than trying to have a conversation through the crackly intercom. That was a point against her in his book. It's not like she should be expecting to be under attack, but with the right quirk, he could be anyone. She really shouldn't trust that he was who he appeared to be. Aizawa-san, how... We weren't expecting you today? I need to speak with Naoki. He interrupted whatever pleasant greeting she was going to regurgitate at him. I think he might be busy right now. He usually has lunch at this time. She tried to turn him away. I have a warrant, he said, holding up the piece of paper as proof. He watched her read through the first few lines on the page before walking around the desk and making his way toward where he remembered Naoki's office being. I can find my own way, he called over his shoulder as the woman sputtered something he didn't bother trying to discern. He opened the door without knocking to find Naoki tucked over a salad at his desk, looking none too pleased to be so rudely walked in on. Excuse me, what? Give me all of the CCTV footage you have from the past 3 years and any records you have pertaining to Midoriya Izuku, he demanded. A look of indignation resolutely settled itself over the man's features, and he put his fork down to gesticulate aggressively as he spoke. I don't have to give you anything without a... Shota slapped the page down onto the desk in front of him, taking great pleasure in how quickly that shut the man up, and changed his tune. I don't understand the hostility, Naoki muttered under his breath. I'll be sure to apologize when you prove it isn't justified, he replied flatly, his glare unfaltering. He could see Naoki starting to sweat around his temples, and he watched the man squirm under his scrutiny. We don't save our CCTV footage. He stumbled over his words, clearly lying through his teeth. It is required by law that you keep the last 30 days on file. Why don't you show me that, and I'll see what I can do about recovering any lost data while I'm at it, he replied with a smile he knew damn well most people found rather disturbing. Thankfully, Naoki led the way to the security hub without another word of complaint, and as he had suspected, the man was full of shit. There were several disorganized external hard drives stored in the back of what could generously be called the IT room. It would be far more accurate to call it a closet, or even a cupboard. There was only enough room for a desk, a chair, a monitor, and the oldest computer Shota had set eyes on in quite some time. It appeared as though CCTV footage was automatically being saved to an external hard drive, and whenever the space ran out, they would simply throw it in a pile and replace it. Thank you. I'll find you when you're needed. Notify your staff that you are all under investigation and are not allowed to leave the prefecture without notice, he said in a tone that clearly showed his platitudes were empty. He sat down at the computer and shut the door in Naoki's face, not bothering to hear if he had something else to say. Shota wouldn't say he was great with computers, but he had spent enough of his heroics career searching through security footage to know his way around. The video quality looked like it was about 480p, and the cameras were motion activated. So, on a 5 terabyte storage capacity, he figured it was safe to shuffle around to the third or fourth drive in the disorganized and unlabeled pile. Hopefully, the pile hadn't been knocked over at any point in the last 3 years, because he didn't want to rummage through God knows how many years of old footage stored in this stack. He plugged in the drive and was pleased to see the files were labeled by date, likely a default setting, and he had chosen one that seemed to span the majority of Izuku's second year here. The incident with Bakugo had happened in May of that year, and there was a camera positioned at the back of the building. The distance at 480p wasn't likely to show much detail, but if the incident was caught on camera, then that would be more than enough proof that the nurse and gym teacher, at the very least, would be implicated in gross negligence. The footage was, as he suspected, extremely grainy. It was also in black and white, so it was difficult to parse out which of the figures was Izuku, but after a minute, he figured it out. Body language was nigh on impossible to read from this distance, but he could see how the kid shied away from everyone. It was hard to watch. He could see how Izuku was calculating when it was safe for him to participate and when he needed to run. It made sense how Ivy was so good at risk assessment when they first met. The poor kid had been living and breathing risk assessment his whole life. Bakugo, on the other hand, wasn't so difficult to spot. He was always at the center of everything. Every time he started moving in Izuku's direction, Shota cringed. He knew what was coming, but that didn't make it any easier to watch. Sparks were firing off from Bakugo's hands as he sprinted toward Izuku, and that alone should have been enough for the gym teacher to intervene. But he didn't. He could see Izuku try and brace for impact, but his efforts were completely in vain. The explosion that Bakugo let off at point-blank range was enough to throw Izuku back several meters. Bakugo's regret was evident even in the few grainy pixels that showed. He froze in place the moment he saw what he'd done. But he didn't do anything else. He didn't intervene when Morita came over, seemingly scolding Izuku, and he didn't intervene when Izuku was sent off, presumably to walk to the nurse on his own. Morita didn't say anything to Bakugo, and the class resumed as if nothing had happened at all. The cameras in the hallways of the school caught much clearer pictures as they weren't so far away. The pain Izuku was in was evident on his face as he walked to the nurse's office. Thankfully, there was footage of him entering and exiting the room, so Shishido would have no way to argue her way out of the situation. On his way to the locker room, Izuku stopped for a moment to assess the damage on his chest, and even though Shota only got the briefest glimpse of it, he felt sick to his stomach. The camera quality still wasn't great, and it was still in black and white, but he could tell the injury was bad. He had to take a moment and remind himself that Izuku was all right, and that this happened years ago. There were so many things that could have gone wrong with an injury like that. If it had gotten infected and he didn't get actual medical attention, he likely would have died from it. Shota took notes of the timestamps and locations where evidence could be pulled from and started mindlessly scrubbing through the footage again. This was work. He needed to focus. There was no lack of instances where Izuku was mistreated in clear view of a staff member, and with every incident, he was sickened and delighted in equal measure. Of course, he wished none of this had happened in the first place, but he was glad to have the evidence necessary to start a case against this horrible excuse of a school. It looked like a testimony from Izuku wasn't going to be strictly necessary, but Tsukashi was right. It would help the case immensely. If this much was caught on camera, there's no telling how much was undocumented, and he couldn't bear the thought of even a single person walking away from this with their hands clean. As he combed through years of footage in that dingy closet, he became more and more convinced that Bakugo had no place at UA. He worked backward from the first clip he watched and saw Bakugo waiting outside the lunchroom not long after Izuku was reportedly evicted. He hid until Izuku thought he was clear of the cafeteria and then slammed his lunch onto the floor and slugged him in the face after shouting at him about something or other. He wished the CCTV had audio. Izuku didn't do a damn thing to stop him, and he didn't get up from the floor until a janitor found him. He couldn't have been knocked out for that long, so Shota had to assume he just didn't have the spirit left to scoop himself up. The janitor seemed nice enough. He cleaned up the mess and sent Izuku on his way before the swarm of kids were released from the cafeteria. It wasn't nearly enough, but it was something. It might be worth seeing if that man would be willing to share testimony for Izuku's sake, if not his own. Maybe a plea deal if Shota could find evidence of wrongdoing on his part. He set that thought aside for now. There was still a lot of footage to go through, and he'd already filled a page with timestamps and notes. Shota was nearly through the last year of tapes when something caused the door to the closet to rattle violently. He had been so focused that it was enough to make him jump, which irritated him more than he'd like to admit. He was going to ignore it, but then he heard muffled argument and the voice of a child that sounded very scared. Conscious of the fact that someone could be up against the door still, he opened it slowly, but apparently they had moved on. There was one student shoved into the corner at the end of the hall, and 3 students caging them in. None of them seemed to notice him at all. "Stop trying to deny it. We all saw you trying to touch Hirota, you freak," one of them jeered. "I didn't. I wasn't. I don't even have my gloves off, guys." The boy in the corner lifted his hands to show that his hands were in fact covered. "Oh yeah? Well, what about Kawasaki?" "I was washing my hands. He startled me. It was an accident. How many times do I have to say it? It was an accident," the boy pleaded. One of the boys who was interrogating him stepped forward with his hand raised, and that was more than enough to get Shota to intervene. He was on the ground at a cocoon of capture weapon before he made it a step closer to the other kid, and suddenly all eyes were on him. "Which one of you wants to explain to me what's going on here?" he asked sternly, looking at the 3 boys closest to him. "Who the heck are you? Let him go," one of them sneered. He obliged the request, quickly reeling in his scarf and sending the boy on the floor, rolling harmlessly, though it was surely still unpleasant. "I am a representative from UA. I won't ask again. What is going on here?" he demanded. The 3 boys looked at each other nervously before the ringleader stood up and dusted himself off. "Okimoto was trying to use his quirk on Hirota, and we weren't going to let that happen," he said with a cocksure grin. "Yeah, we were stopping a villain," one of the other boys claimed. "Is that true?" he asked the boy in the corner. "No, sir. I never used my stupid quirk. Liar! You used it on—" "Enough," Shota interrupted sternly. Of course, it was more quirk discrimination. This place was rife with it. He didn't know what he expected. He could see Izuku's eyes in the fear painted on that kid's face. If the teachers here weren't going to properly educate these kids, then it was up to him, wasn't it? "What's his quirk? What are you accusing him of?" he baited the boys. "He's a villain. All he can do is hurt people," one of them chimed in. "Yeah, if he touches you, then your whole body feels like it's on fire or something. He almost killed Kawasaki," another one claimed. "That's probably what he was trying to do," the last one agreed with a sneer. "Okimoto, have you ever purposely used your quirk against someone?" he asked calmly. "No, I never wanted this stupid thing to begin with. I would never do that on purpose, Okimoto insisted. Oh, shut up, Okimoto. Stop pretending in front of this guy. You're a villain and you know it. He's a villain? Really? How so? Shota asked with mock curiosity. All his quirk does is hurt people. So he's a villain because of his quirk? He asked to clarify. They all looked at him like he was an idiot and nodded. I work with All Might, you know. He pivoted the conversation, and he could see the way all four boys' eyes lit up with interest. I have seen what he's capable of firsthand. He could level a city if he wanted to, and there's not much anyone could do to stop him. Endeavor's the same, and I have worked with Hawks in the past as well. Those three could hurt so many people. They could take over Japan if they really wanted to. Do you think they're villains? He asked. The bullies looked at each other, again seeming uncertain, but the boy in the corner looked like his whole worldview had just been shattered. Well, that's different. Their quirks can be used for good. What good does hurting people do? One of them argued. Exactly. What good does hurting people do? He fired their words back at them. They were stunned for a few seconds, but it didn't take long for them to snap out of it. But he's a villain. You have to rough him up to bring him in. The ringleader insisted. Yes, sometimes you do. It sounds like Okimoto has the potential to be a very effective hero then, doesn't it? He challenged. They didn't have an argument against that, but they still didn't look convinced. I once worked a case where the culprit was a man whose quirk made everyone in a 10-foot radius of him relax. This sounds like such a heroic quirk, doesn't it? It could have been, but the man decided to use it to lure people away and sell them to human traffickers. Heroic and villainous quirks are a myth. The distinction between good and bad lies solely in how you choose to use your powers. From where I'm standing, the three of you are the villains here, not Okimoto. He took a moment to let the message sink in for the three boys in front of him before he spoke again. Now, aren't you supposed to be in class? He prompted them. It didn't take long for them to snap out of their introspection and scramble away. He hoped that the message would stick with them, but there was only so much he could do against an entire childhood of being taught the opposite. Okimoto was still stood frozen in the corner, and it looked like his eyes had gone a bit glassy, which was something that Shota politely ignored. You all right? He asked. Okimoto looked up at him, and Shota could see his hands shaking. He was so young. He looked like a first year, the same age Izuku would have been when his mother left him. Yes, I'm all right. Thank you, sir, Okimoto replied with a bow. That was basic human decency, kid. It seems startlingly absent around here, but that's how you should expect to be treated. You don't need to thank me for it, he insisted. The bullies weren't the only ones who needed to relearn the way the world was supposed to work. Did the teachers here let them treat you like that? He asked when it was clear that Okimoto didn't have anything to say. They brought me to an empty hall for a reason, I guess. Okimoto hedged around his answer. That doesn't answer my question. If one of your teachers had walked past instead of me, would they have helped you? He pressed. I don't know. Probably right. That's what they're supposed to do, Okimoto answered sheepishly. You aren't in trouble with me, kid. I'm investigating this place because I met someone who used to go here who was severely mistreated. I want to help you if I can. You should feel safe here. I want to make this a place where you feel safe. The kid studied his face intently, seemingly looking for a hint that he was lying, but there was nothing to find. After a moment, he looked to have resigned himself to the fact that Shota was telling the truth, and his expression crumpled. No, they probably wouldn't. They don't care, the kid admitted weakly. Thank you for your honesty, Okamoto. I'm going to make this place better, all right? He assured. Okimoto didn't look very convinced, but Shota supposed he would believe it when he saw it. Will you be safe in class? He asked reluctantly. He didn't expect to like the answer he got. Yeah, I'll be fine. They aren't so bad when the teachers are around, Okimoto replied. All right, then go on. If they try to give you trouble, tell them you were with me, he said with a sharp grin, knowing damn well how much every teacher in this school was scared of him right now. The kid warily nodded his head, likely because of the vaguely murderous grin on Shota's face, and made his way down the hall. Once Okimoto was out of sight and out of earshot, he grabbed his phone from his pocket and made a call. Hello, Tsukashi answered on the third ring, thankfully not sounding like he had just woken up this time. I have video evidence of willful negligence on a good deal of the staff here. The school is going to need to be shut down until they can fill the vacancies. Do you have a team you can assign to this? It's become a case all on its own. The issues are ongoing. I witnessed them firsthand. Shota got right into it. Yes, I can find someone to take that over for you. Probably Sansa. He's got a track record with being ruthlessly thorough on quirk discrimination cases, Tsukashi replied with a hint of vindictive pride in his tone. He'd worked with Sansa before, and moreover, he trusted Tsukashi's judgment. Sansa having a mutation quirk gave him personal cause to be invested in this case as well, so Shota didn't doubt the case was in good cause. Perfect. Tell him to do whatever he can to keep my students' names out of it. I'll talk to Nedzu about that as well. I doubt it will go past local news, but I don't want people pestering Midoriya about this. I'll send over the list of names I have concrete evidence on. I told the principal to tell his staff that they aren't permitted to leave the prefecture without notice, but I don't have confidence that he'll listen to me. So if you could send Sansa over here before school lets out, that would be preferable. On it. Sending an email to both of you right now. Send your list back on that chain. Sansa should be able to make it over there in 15 to 20, Tsukashi replied. Good, he answered, and ended the call. He needed to get Naoki to call an assembly to look over the kids whose teachers would be abruptly departing until their parents could come pick them up. He also needed to get a staff roster so that he could assign names to faces to get Sansa moving. No one was going to be mistreated here like that ever again, not if he had anything to say about it. After a volatile, but thankfully brief, discussion with Naoki, Shota had done everything he needed to do to get the ball rolling just in time for Sansa to show up with a few lower-ranking officers. He took immense satisfaction in watching staff get filed into cruisers with cuffs on. He knew they would be held at a low bail, and they would likely be out by the end of the day. But it would be a permanent mark on their record, and they would never be allowed to work in education again. It wasn't enough, but it was all the system could manage as it was. So he'd have to take what he got. He was about to leave with a bag full of hard drives to comb through more thoroughly at home when someone stopped him. Excuse me, are you the one from UA? You're leading the investigation? A man in coveralls asked. This must be the janitor he'd seen on the footage earlier. He'd wanted to speak with him anyway. So now seemed as good a time as any. Yes, I actually had some questions for you, Kimoto-san. Shota answered. Am I under investigation? He asked defensively. All staff is under investigation, but that's not why I wanted to speak with you. I've looked through the CCTV footage, albeit briefly. You appeared to be one of the few people I couldn't implicate, he said, trying to keep his hopes under wraps that there was one redeemable person on staff here. Well, that's because I don't stand for their shit. I've been here 26 years, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. Anyone that had any decency in them left a long time ago. I tried bringing it up to the school board, but I was told under no uncertain terms that if I wanted to keep my job, then I should keep those thoughts to myself. There's not much I can do as a janitor, but I wasn't going to just leave. Besides, I need this job anyway, Kimoto replied. Oh, thank God. Having an adult eyewitness on the right side of this issue could save these kids a lot of grief. If he was willing to testify in court, it would be invaluable. Do you have documentation of this exchange from when you filed the complaints? Shota pressed. I might have an email if I look. Is there anything else that could help? Kimoto asked. Shota gestured for the man to follow and had him sit down in one of the now empty offices nearby. He pulled his phone out in clear view, started an audio recording, and set it down on the table between them. Tell me everything, he requested. Kimoto looked happy to oblige. Izuku was scrawling in the sketchbook Hitoshi had given him for his birthday when he heard a knock at the door. It wasn't necessarily a violent knock, but it was not as gentle as it usually was when Mike or Eraser came to talk to him. Well, it must be Eraser, actually. Mike was at the radio station prepping for his Friday show. Yeah? He called back. Eraser opened the door, and Izuku could tell by the look on his face that he was not going to be happy about whatever he had to say. We need to talk. Do you have a minute? He asked, confirming Izuku's suspicions. Yeah, I guess. Talk about what exactly? I paid Aldera another visit. Izuku felt his stomach drop. What did he find? Why was he so angry? Did he know he was lying about his quirk? Did he find out he really was a null? Was he going to... That incident with Bakugo was not a one-time deal. I reviewed the CCTV footage. Eraser interrupted his frantic spiraling. Oh, okay. This still wasn't ideal, but at least it wasn't... Never mind what it wasn't. That didn't matter. Well, no, it wasn't. I never said it was, he replied lamely. Eraser looked distraught in a way that Izuku had hardly ever seen him. His hair was more unkempt than usual. It was obvious that he'd been running his hands through it compulsively. He was wound tighter than a spring, as if he was one wrong move from losing his cool entirely. Izuku had to tread lightly. Then why are you so insistent against his expulsion? He abused you for years. That wasn't bullying, Izuku. That was abuse. Eraser shot back. Did he just call him Izuku? He never called him that. Why was he so angry? More importantly, how was Izuku supposed to calm him down? He'd been waiting for the other shoe to drop for months, and now that it was happening, he had no clue what to do. He was just a kid. All of them. They all abused you. They were all complicit in a crime. What happened to you was a crime. Eraser firmly interrupted his pitiful argument. He was about to say something. He didn't know what, but he had opened his mouth to give a rebuttal when he was cut off again, this time by a loud meow. Kimchi was standing between the bed and where Eraser stood at the door, with her fur on end and her tail bushier than he'd ever seen it. She looked to be glaring up at him, and Eraser looked down at her, then back up to Izuku before his shoulders dropped, and he muttered something that distinctly sounded like, damn it. He was rubbing at his temples with his middle finger and thumb, with his palm covering his face. But he didn't say anything else. Kimchi took the moment of silence as a prime time to trot over and sit down directly on top of his sketchbook. I'm sorry. Eraser said when he looked back up to him. I should have waited until I wasn't so angry, he clarified when Izuku didn't respond. Izuku still didn't know what to say to that. He was just sitting on his bed and staring like an idiot as Eraser walked properly into the room and sat down at his desk chair. Their positions mirrored the last conversation they had had like this in a way that Izuku very much did not appreciate. Eraser seemed to have picked up on that because he dramatically relaxed his posture, leaning forward and resting his elbows on his knees. That was, well, it still wasn't great, but it was better. I need you to understand that what happened to you was not okay. It was not something that should just be swept under the rug. It was morally reprehensible and literally illegal. Eraser broke the silence calmly. The words made it feel like there were bugs crawling under his skin. He wanted to scream that they weren't wrong, that he was a null, but keeping one for all a secret was more important. So he kept his mouth shut and did his best to not think about how many people were going to be charged because of him. People like that aren't just going to stop swinging because their punching bag moved on. You're not the only one they mistreated, and you won't be the last. Not unless we do something about it. I know you don't want me to be doing this. I know you just want to pretend like it never happened. But this isn't just about you. I met a kid today who looked like he was about to get his shit kicked in because he had a villain quirk. I told off the other kids this time, but I'm not going to be there next time. We can't leave his safety in the hands of people who will let that happen again, Eraser explained. Oh, that... He hadn't thought about that. Sure, some of the other students got bullied at Aldera, but the kids with weak quirks or villain quirks kind of kept to their own. It never occurred to him that he was acting as a shield for them, aside from the times he was literally acting as a shield for them. God, he was an idiot. Now this kid was suffering because he never stood up for himself or told anybody. Not that anyone would have listened to him, of course, but he didn't even try. It's not strictly necessary to the case at this point, but it would help if I could get a testimony from you. I already got one from one of the janitors there, and I was going to try to get in contact with that kid's parents to see if I can get a proper one from him. But the more evidence we have, the better. It doesn't have to be right now either. Just think about it. Eraser continued when Izuku didn't respond. Realizing that he hadn't replied at all in quite a while, he nodded his head to show that he was still listening. That was too much to think about right now. He had just spilled his guts to Hitoshi earlier this week, and Eraser said it could wait anyways. We still need to talk about Bakugo. The way he treated you is unacceptable. Eraser brought the conversation back around. He couldn't just nod his way out of this one. He needed to say something. Kachan's future was on the line. How was he supposed to know it was unacceptable if no one ever told him? You told him and he listened, he argued. Kid, there's 1,000 other people out there who are gunning for his seat in this class. 1,000 people who know inherently how to treat people with respect. Why should he be sitting there when they aren't? Eraser asked, doing a poor job of keeping the exasperation out of his tone. He could tell that there wasn't an answer to that question that was going to convince Eraser to change his mind. If he said he couldn't live with himself knowing he was the reason Kachan couldn't be a hero, he'd take that as proof that he didn't deserve his seat. If he said that he was almost 100% sure that Kachan would either become a vigilante, unlikely and certainly unsuccessful, or a villain, very likely and certainly successful, then Eraser would say he was unfit for heroics in the first place. All he could really do was beg or bargain. Give him one more chance, a test. He's changed. He really has. Let him prove it, he pleaded. Eraser took a deep breath and looked away from him. If that reaction was anything to go by, then Izuku would guess that he was not pleased with the premise. But he didn't immediately refuse, so it was something. He had a foothold. He needed to keep pushing. Pair us up for something he can't do on his own. And if he works with me, then that's proof. He has so much potential. His quirk is, he pressed, quirks aren't everything. Hell, they're not even in the top 10 things that make a good hero. My quirk is ill-suited for heroics. So is Hisashi's. Mine doesn't help with combat, and his is damn near impossible to control. But we both worked our asses off to make it. Just because Bakugo got the perfect opportunity handed to him on a silver platter doesn't mean he's entitled to anything. Eraser rebutted. All right. All that left was begging then, he supposed. He hardly had any pride left to speak of at this point, so what did he have to lose? Please? He stuttered out pathetically. Eraser just looked at him with an expression that was difficult to parse. The anger had abated, but it was still there. It was sadder now, though. He was studying Izuku's face in a way that made him feel like a specimen pinned under a magnifying glass, but that meant he was thinking about it, so Izuku let him continue. I will be meeting with Netsu to discuss Bakugo's enrollment tomorrow morning. I will bring that up when we talk. Eraser answered reluctantly after what felt like several eons of contemplation. Izuku did his best to not let the tension in his shoulders visibly drop at that. It wasn't a guarantee. It was a Hail Mary at best. It wasn't until Eraser finally left that he allowed himself to relax, though his shoulders quickly found their way back up to where they had been, and his fists seemed to refuse to leave their vice-like grip on nothing. The anger he kept stored away in jars in the back of his mind were rattling again. He wasn't sure whether it was anger at Kacchan, Eraser, or the situation in general. However, he knew better than to go looking for that answer, because the only place he would find it was on the underside of the lids. End of chapter.